Hello, I'm Bob Searing. I'm the curator of history here at the Onondaga Historical Association, and on behalf of myself and the entire staff here at OHA, we'd like to extend to you and yours our warmest wishes for a wonderful holiday season. Wanted to tell you a little story, Christmas related, about the time Charles Dickens came to Syracuse. Of course, the author of A Christmas Carol, beloved by generations of readers on both sides of the Atlantic. Came to Syracuse in 1868, and certainly our fair city made an impression on the legendary English author. The first edition of A Christmas Carol, Charles Dickens' now beloved tale, was published on December 19th, 1843. A quarter century after its first publication, Dickens had become one of the world's most respected authors and arguably one of the most famous people in the English-speaking world. To capitalize on this renown, he decided to return to America for the first time since his 1842 trip, which resulted in his much maligned travel journal, American Notes, where readers first got a taste of his acerbic opinions of Great Britain's former colonies. It didn't make him many friends in the United States. Thus, on November 19th, 1867, Dickens arrived in Boston, Massachusetts, to embark on a triumphant American tour, reading selections from two of his most popular works. After nearly 4 grueling months on the road, Dickens arrived in Syracuse's Vanderbilt Square 2 days before his March 9th performance of A Christmas Carol and selection from the Pickwick Papers at Weiting Hall. Dickens, an urbane and cosmopolitan man, lived in London and had visited Boston, Philadelphia, New York, and Washington, D.C. already on this tour. Though it was amid an extensive period of growth and increased economic expansion, provincial Syracuse did not quite measure up to the great metropolises with which he was accustomed. Dickens, channeling a bit of his own Mr. Scrooge's charm, turned his pen on the Salt City in several invectives to friends back in England. From his room in the Syracuse house that overlooked the Erie Canal and the newly completed Onondaga County Savings Bank, we call it the Gridley Building, he wrote to his friend, the noted English actor Charles Fector, on March 8th. Dickens said, "I am here in the most wonderful out-of-the-world place, which looks like it had begun to be built yesterday, and we're going to be imperfectly knocked together with a nail or two the day after tomorrow." His observation was not without merit. The city was awash in construction projects to keep up with its booming population, which had more than doubled since being chartered in 1848 to nearly 40,000. As to his accommodations, Dickens pulled no punches. The 40-year-old Syracuse house, the city's finest lodging accommodation, was, quote, "the worst inn that was ever seen." The famous author ended his letter with a scathing Victorian-era Yelp review. Quote, "We had an old buffalo for supper and an old pig for breakfast, and I don't know what for dinner at 6. Sounds delightful. In his defense, Dickens had the unfortunate luck to pass through our fine city during a particularly ugly thaw, coming on the heels of those, semi-annual early March blizzards Central New Yorkers are all too familiar with. The thaw, which, according to Dickens, left the whole country underwater, left the streets nearly impassable and desolate. He commented to Fector that, quote, "he looked out the window for people, and I can't find any." Luckily for Mr. Dickens, there were plenty of people filling the Weiting Theater the next evening. Syracusans had started buying tickets to his performance in late February. People had come in from as far as Cortland and even Auburn. A ticket holder, reminiscing some years later, spoke to the excitement regarding the performance. Quote, "Everyone was crazy about Dickens," he said. "His stories used to come out in Harper's Monthly, and people could hardly wait for them." Dickens sold out the theater days before he arrived here. 1,500 tickets at $2 per ticket. Not a bad gate at all. Having made the short walk across Salina Street from his lovely room at the Syracuse house, Dickens took to the Weiting stage at the exact stroke of 8 o'clock, standing in front of a table covered in maroon velvet, dressed in a black suit adorned with red carnation. Illuminated by several gaslights, Dickens picked up a book from a mini table and began. Marley was dead to begin with. He proceeded to mesmerize the standing room only audience for the next 2¼ hours, with a face that, according to the review in the Syracuse Journal, quote, "revealed so much expression and such varied form of it, and the voice spoke for so wide a range of characters, that versatility and inexhaustible resources of the mind thereby mirrored were better understood and more perfectly appreciated." While the reviewer appreciated the, quote, incomparable Dickens, quote, reading of his second piece, The Trial, which was a portion of the serialized The Pickwick Papers, it was The Christmas Carol that touched the, quote, finer feelings, vivifies the common humanity, and makes people better and worthier. Charles Dickens left Syracuse the next morning with a much heavier purse. As pleased as he must have been to depart, he did lament to another correspondent that, because of the horrendous weather, he had been unable to see the mighty Onondaga Salt Works. This was probably for the best. He was clearly salty enough already.